This is the Nuphy Kick75. It's one of a kind, being the first hybrid profile keyboard on the market, but is it worth it? Let's find out. But before we get into the video, I do want to mention that this keyboard was sent out to me by Nuphy, but I'm not being paid, and every opinion given is mine and mine alone. So without further ado, let's get into the unboxing. So the first thing you'll notice other than the keyboard whenever opening the box is an envelope with some stickers, a quick start guide, and an FAQ. Next is the keyboard itself, wrapped in a soft plastic bag. But for now, we're going to set that off to the side. Under the keyboard is a little section with some accessories, like this nicely colored branded USB-A to USB-C cable, a branded keycap and switch puller, two little baggies with the 2.4 GHz USB-C dongle, as well as a few extra keycaps. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the build of the Kick75. When first looking at the Kick75, you'll probably notice the retro style, which is shown throughout the entire keyboard. But we're going to start with the top cover. It's made from a nice soft translucent polycarbonate plastic, which feels really solid. The material it's made out of also diffuses the RGB lighting from the south-facing diodes below the switches, which makes the lighting look so much better. On the top right of the keyboard is a plastic knob, which has this interesting X-shaped design, and is super satisfying to use since it has a really nice tactility to it. It can change your PC's audio either up or down, as well as mute it with a click, just like any other knob on any other keyboard. On the right side of the keyboard is a little light that is default RGB, but turns light blue when the caps lock is on. It also has this weird little magnetic plastic piece that I genuinely do not know what it's for, but it's there. On the sides of the Kick75, the top cover curves down to the bottom case really smoothly, which keeps the retro look with its PS2 or NES light gray color, which I actually really like and matches perfectly with the aesthetic they're going for. On the bottom case, which is made from the same durable plastic, are these indented lines, which Nuphy says are meant to represent the grooves on the bottom of a shoe, hence the kick part of the name. Across the entire back is this Mario-like 2D platform game with Nuphy spelled out in the blocks above it, which is all printed very nicely. And above that is the Kick75 branding etched in the bottom of the case. On each corner are blue rubber feet that keep the keyboard from sliding around, as well as two one-stage feet, which allows people who prefer more of an angle to have a better typing experience. On the back of the Kick75 are two yellow switches, one to swap between using it on your Mac device or your Windows device, and another switch for using the keyboard wired, wireless using the 2.4 GHz dongle, and turning it off. Moving to the right is a slot to store the 2.4 GHz dongle when you're not using it, which is nice especially if you have multiple wireless keyboards and you don't want to get them all mixed up. It also comes with a little rubber piece that sits in the slot when you're not using it. And to the right of that is a USB-C port which lets you charge the Kick75, as well as using the keyboard wired. In the very center of the back of the keyboard is this red piece, which you'd assume is just part of the case, but it's actually rubber which can be easily pulled off to access the last 2 of 8 screws on the bottom of the keyboard to be able to take it apart. Now when buying the Kick75, you have the option to choose which profile it comes in. So whichever you prefer, you have the option to choose either of them. But if you've looked into this keyboard at all, or noticed from the title, you may have heard about something called hybrid profile. This is a brand new feature, not just in Nuphy keyboards, but in keyboards in general. With the Kick75, you have the option to swap in between high profile and low profile even after buying it. To do this, you'll either have to buy a high profile kit if you bought the low profile keyboard, or a low profile kit if you bought the high profile keyboard on the Nuphy website. The kits don't come with keycaps or switches, but they do come with a taller top case for your keyboard, a decent amount of case foam to accommodate either the high or low profile keyboard, as well as with the high profile kit, you get a little piece to put on the knob to make it taller. You also get this included screwdriver with an additional bit to be able to unscrew your keyboard. As I'm sure you guessed from all the customization so far, the PCB in the Kick75 is hot swappable for either 3 or 5 pin switches, which means you can replace the switches that came with the keyboard with any other mechanical switch. The keycaps on the Kick75 are NSA profile or MSA depending on if you have the high profile version or not, and are made from a durable double shot PBT material, which feels super smooth and extremely comfortable, especially for someone who's never used a low profile keyboard before. The keycaps also keep this retro color design with the gray from the rest of the case, as well as a green escape key, a yellow spacebar, a blue enter key, and a red knob. Under the keycaps, at least in my keyboard, are the Nuphy and Gateron red nanos. The nano switches for the Kick75 are the 3rd generation version of Nuphy's nano switches, which were made in collaboration with Gateron and are all pre-lubed. The red nanos in my keyboard are linear, have a starting force of 45 grams and an end force of 60, and have a travel distance of 3.8 millimeters, as do all the other nano switches. From my experience, they sound incredible and feel even better. And if you don't believe me, here's a sound test. Kick75 can come with 4 different switches, with each switch having a high profile equivalent. The Gateron Red Nanos, which you just heard and are the ones that I have, the Gateron Brown Nanos, which are tactile, and thanks to the Nuphy website, we have a sound preview of all the switches, so here's what the browns sound like. Next are the Gateron Silver Nanos, which are linear and sound like this. And the Gateron Blush Nanos, which are linear as well and sound like this. The stabilizers in the Kick75 are also something special. Nuphy calls them hybrid satellite stabilizers, which I will admit is an interesting name. They were designed to be compatible with both high and low profile switches depending on where they're mounted. When mounted on a PCB, they're compatible with low profile switches, but when mounted on the plate, they're compatible with high profile switches, which is a really cool way of not having to replace the stabilizers every time you swap. The stabilizers themselves are extremely smooth and genuinely feel incredible. And since they're pre-lubed from the factory, they sound great as well, which you already heard. The plate on this keyboard is made from the same polycarbonate plastic as is the whole case, and it's gasket mounted, which gives it a soft and bouncy typing experience. Gaskets can also reduce unwanted pinging sounds from making it to the case, but since there's a significant amount of foam and silicone pads throughout the entirety of the case, you won't need to worry about that either way. The battery in the Kick75 can either be 2,500 mAh with the Nuphy IO version, or 4,000 mAh with the QMK and VIA version. I personally have the QMK and VIA version, which from my experience, the battery life has been incredible, even with the RGB lighting on, which can cut down your battery life a lot. However, with the Nuphy IO version, you can expect around a month of usage without the backlighting on, and around a week of usage with the backlighting on, depending on how many hours a day you use it, obviously. The pulling rate in the Kick75 is 1000 Hz in the 2.4 GHz mode, as well as being wired, which is pretty standard for a wireless gaming keyboard. It also makes the latency almost indistinguishable from being wired. The keyboard can also be used through Bluetooth with 125 Hz polling rate, but if you get this keyboard and you try to use Bluetooth, you may be confused, as I was, on how to use Bluetooth, since on the back, none of the switches have a Bluetooth option. To actually use Bluetooth, you'll need to hold down the function key and click either the 1, 2, or 3 key, depending on what you're wanting to connect to. When doing this, the keyboard will start searching for available devices to connect to, and you'll be able to tell because the light on the side of the keyboard will be flashing blue. And to connect back to your PC, you'll need to hold the FN key and click 4. The software for the Kick75 can also vary depending on which version you buy. It can either be compatible with the Nuphy IO software or the VIA software, which I mentioned earlier. I'm only going to be going over the VIA software, but I'm almost positive that both softwares have the same capabilities, so I don't think you're missing out if you choose one or the other than the battery capacity. In the software for the Kick75, you can really easily customize the brightness of the lighting, which can get impressively bright. Personally, I stick with the default half brightness because if I turn it up more, it might drain the battery a lot faster, and I personally think it looks better in my peripheral, it not being like blindingly bright, so that's just what I do. You can also choose between a lot of preset lighting effects. Personally, I really like the Jelly Bean raindrop effect, although there's just something about the rainbow cycle that goes perfectly with this keyboard, so I stick with that. You also have the ability to remap any key on the entire keyboard to any input you could possibly think of, whether it be a media input, a custom macro, or even a key that otherwise wouldn't be available on a 75% keyboard. So before we go any further into this video, I do want to mention how to connect to the QMK and VIA software. This right here is where you'll need to go to find the instructions to do that. I'll leave a link to this webpage down in the description for you to find it because it was hard for me to find it. Once you get the keyboard, you'll just want to follow all these steps right here. It's not hard, but if you don't know what you're doing, it can be a little tough. One thing I do want to mention, but I'm sure it won't even matter, is when you click this link to go to the JSON file for the keyboard, the Kick75 doesn't pop up, and I'm almost positive that's because it's not out yet, and I have a pre-release version, but whenever you get the keyboard, it'll definitely be there, so that's just something to know. But yeah, I just want to mention that so people weren't confused. Back to the video. Now with all that being said, here's a few things you should know before buying the Kick75. As I mentioned earlier, when buying this keyboard, you have the ability to choose between high profile or low profile, depending on what you prefer. You can choose the software your keyboard will be compatible with. Just remember that the battery capacity is different between both models. And lastly, you could choose between 4 different switches, depending on what you think sounds best, or if you like linear or tactile. If you'd like to pre-order the Kick75, or you're watching this after it already came out, I'll leave a link to it in the description below if you're interested. So that was everything that you needed to know about the Nuphy Kick75. I personally really enjoy my time with this keyboard, and I think you will too, but is it worth $90 to $110? That's up to you to decide. Whether you watch this video for entertainment, or you're looking to buy this keyboard, I appreciate you being here, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.